First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That quote is from Martin Niemöller, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there's a few different variations of the quote itself out there. It's often misinterpreted and thought of as a poem, even though it was never a written poem. It was something that he said years after World War II ended, as he would go around speaking to different groups and kind of giving his take on the Nazis' rise to power. Because you see, Martin Niemöller was a Nazi sympathizer, I guess you would say, early on. And he would keep quiet and didn't really speak up as different groups were targeted until he was actually targeted and thrown in a prison for years until after World War II. And he regretted for the rest of his life not speaking up, not saying something when he knew that wrong things were happening, things that shouldn't be going on. And he wished that he would have spoken up. He wished that he would have said something because he had the power, he had the voice, he should have done something. This quote is very relevant nowadays, especially in the past few years, as we have seen the rise of Donald Trump and the Trump wing, the MAGA wing of what used to be the Republican Party. I got in not me per se necessarily, but my wife got in an argument with some family on Facebook, and it kind of escalated a little quicker than it needed to. Basically, what they had done was they had taken a quote that from the Oprah Winfrey and Kamala Harris talk that happened last week, and they had taken just a snippet that they were sharing that somebody else had gotten the snippet. They hadn't got it. They were just sharing it on Facebook from where she said that she was going to be, if somebody broke into her house, she would shoot them. And in the moment, it was kind of a funny moment, and it was kind of a relatable human moment of like, you have these people, these gun owners around the country that say that any infringement at all on the Second Amendment, is an infringement on the entire thing, and Kamala Harris is coming to steal our guns. And it was relatable in that she was trying to say, look, I'm a gun owner, and I know how to use my gun, and if somebody were to break into my house, I'm going to make sure that I'm protecting myself and my family. But it's been taken out of context. It's been twisted. It's been taken by the right wing, the Republican side, and they're saying things like, well, she has Secret Service. She doesn't have to worry about that. She has this. She has that. She doesn't believe in gun rights. And there's been so much misinformation and so many things changing. And when I read this quote from Martin Niemöller, it made me think, because I'd heard this quote other places before, but it was always in different ways. And I didn't realize that a lot of times it wasn't even anything like what he had said originally. It wasn't even anything, because he changed it depending on who he was talking to, the different groups, to kind of reach out to those groups and make those groups understand. But there was things that there's been twisted versions of the quote that have been out there that he never even said. And that's not to say that they're not relevant, but it got me thinking about this whole thing with fake news and the way things get twisted. And then on top of that, my reasons for standing up and doing something and saying something. So I want to talk about all of that today, and specifically looking back to, it was about February or March when I was doing some political videos. And one video in particular, I was talking about the Supreme Court and how the Supreme Court shouldn't be bringing religion into their decisions. No court, no judge should be bringing their religion into their decisions from the bench. And at the time, I was very passionate in that video. And the man who I call my stepfather, my stepdad, we had recently reconnected. We'd been kind of getting along well for a couple of years, and then he saw that video, didn't like what I had to say, and got pretty mad at me in the comments, up to and including telling me, "Hey, have a nice life." He basically told me in a YouTube comment to have a nice life. He was never going to talk to me again. And my first reaction was, did I do something wrong? Was I really too angry? What's going on here? And it's been something that's been on my mind more and more as we get closer to the election, as I do these videos of, am I being too angry? Should I be coming across as a little more happy? Should I be, the if you look at the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaign, it's all about being joyful and being, looking forward to the future. And maybe I'm being too angry. But then I started thinking more about it. And I realized I am angry. I'm pissed. And realistically, we all should be pissed. We all should be angry and going to the polls on November 5th and taking our anger out at the ballot box. And for me specifically, when I think about it, I have people that served next to me in Iraq that died defending the Constitution, defending the idea of America and freedom, defending the people back home who we saw as people who couldn't defend themselves, and we were standing up for their rights. And Donald Trump is stepping on the Constitution. Donald Trump is ripping it apart. And when that was brought up, getting back to the conversation that my wife was having with some family members online, they were they were throwing out things that Trump has been saying about Kamala Harris. They were throwing out things and saying that Trump was better for the country and he was going to do all these great things. It was very clear that they lived inside this little bubble where they imagined that Donald Trump was the end-all be-all. And even up to and including the fact that they said that even though they shared this clip from the Kamala Harris Oprah Winfrey town hall, they hadn't watched it. And they hadn't listened to anything she said because they don't like her. And it got me thinking, okay, well, if you're not listening to the other side, what are you doing? How do you make a decision if you're only listening, if you're living in an echo chamber, if you're only listening inside the one box? I've gone out and I've listened to Trump speak. I've heard him at rallies whether it's on TV or YouTube, and watching him and listening to what he says, because I think it's important to get both sides. I've listened to the people over on Fox News and heard what they had to say. I've listened to the other side. And I've come to the conclusion after hearing both sides out and what they stand for and what they want, and looking at the facts of the matter, that Donald Trump's ripping apart the Constitution, and he doesn't care about himself. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. He doesn't care about you or me or the country. He only cares about not going to jail. And not only that, he is actively working to dismantle everything that the United States stands for. And when you go back and you look at the Supreme Court and the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I've got two daughters that directly are impacted by that. That their health care, that their ability to make sure that they are able to make decisions for their own bodies with their help with their doctors is in jeopardy moving forward, depending on where they live. Their ability to love who they want to love and marry who they want to marry, should they decide to get married someday, is in jeopardy. And people don't accept that. They don't want to realize that. These are people, and one of the arguments that was made in the conversation that was going back and forth that I was watching with my wife and her family was about abortion, specifically Roe versus Wade, and about how they were upset because people might be using it as a method of birth control. To which my response was, who the hell cares? Go for it. You want to use it as a method for birth control, do it. But that's not really the majority of the people that are doing it. There's a million reasons why a woman might need that particular kind of health care, and to tell her that she can't get it, to risk her life because some politician decided that they had to side with a religious faction, that they want to control a woman's body or a woman's right to choose. And it makes me angry. because I fought. I went to Iraq. I put my life on the line for the protections enshrined in the Constitution, including Roe versus Wade, because it was a constitutionally decided thing by the Supreme Court in the 1970s. And to see those constitutional rights being ripped away, and to see people out there that want to rip away the right to vote. I see these states right now that are trying like hell to find ways to call the voter rolls, to get people off of the voter rolls, because they don't want people voting. Because the more people that vote, the more likely it is that Democrats win, and the Republicans don't want that. And the Republican Party itself has become twisted. You know, you've got some Republicans out there that are standing up for the country, and they're putting country over party, and they're saying, hey, vote for Kamala Harris. Get out there. You might not agree with everything she says, but get out there and do it, because it's important. The future of our country is at stake. But the ideals of the Republican Party have been corrupted and twisted. I'm a registered Republican in the state of Ohio. I have been since the first primary that I voted in 2016. You know, I didn't vote in any primary up to that because, honestly, I didn't know how the process worked, and I was very uninformed. And I didn't vote in any primaries until 2016 when I voted for John Kasich. Because John Kasich was somebody that I thought would make a good president. He wound up losing the primary to Donald Trump. But ever since then, I've been a registered Republican, but I voted Democrat. I voted Democrat because I see what Donald Trump is doing to this country. I see what his influence has been doing and how he's been corrupting the ideals of our nation. You know, Benjamin Franklin was asked in 1787, after the Constitutional Convention, what kind of government have you given us? And his response was a republic, if you can keep it. And that if you can keep it part is super important. And that's why I say we need to get angry. You should be mad. You should be pissed off. Because there are people trying to tear that away. And the misinformation out there, you know, just like the Martin Niemöller quote, things are getting twisted. People are ignoring the facts. They don't want to believe. They don't want to. They fall into these conspiracy theory rabbit holes, or they live in a bubble where they only listen to one news organization. They only listen to one media outlet. And in reality, you can't do that. You know, no matter what media outlet you choose as your primary media outlet, and no matter who you like to listen to the most, you need to get your information from other places. You need to reach out. You need to understand. And you need to look at the motivations of the people that are running for office. If you look at Donald Trump, when he stands up there and he says things like, you know, I didn't have to run for president. I run because I love the country and all of this stuff. If you look at where he was at in 2016, 2015, when he announced, he was starting to fall out of public prominence. He wasn't as popular as he had been. His television shows had been, The Apprentice had been losing ratings, and he was looking for a way to boost those ratings. From the beginning, it's been about boosting the ratings and getting himself out there. He didn't expect to win the Republican primary, let alone the election. And then the entire time, he spends all of this time in the office disrespecting the office of President of the United States, sending thugs out across the world to try and get information on his opponent. The only reason that they didn't accomplish more during that first term is because they weren't prepared for him to win. Nobody expected. He didn't even expect to win. This time around, they've got Project 2025. And if you don't think that Project 2025 is Donald Trump's thing, if you listen to him and he says, oh, I don't know anything about this Project 25 thing, go back in time and watch some interviews and watch things that he said in 2023 and even 2022 when they were talking about, he had a blueprint that was going to be, they're putting together for his next presidency, for his next term. His people that worked with him in his administration, put it together. His name is in it all over the place. You can go to specific pages and see what they're doing with the Department of Education and LGBTQ rights and abortion. And they don't even have to ban abortion nationwide. All they have to do is use the Comstock Act to stop it from, to stop medical equipment and drugs from being shipped places, and that pretty much stops it from being. You can't get an abortion anywhere in the country if you can't get the supplies. All of these things that Trump is doing and his people are doing, and they're out there, they're lying constantly. He's hanging out with people like Laura Loomer, who is a conspiracy theorist who thinks that 9/11 was an inside job. She thinks that September 11th was orchestrated by the United States government. And if you believe that, you're just plain wrong. The facts are clear. The evidence is clear. Not from a conspiracy theorist, not from somebody who is spouting off bullshit and trying to connect the dots and sitting there with their corkboard and putting string in between all the different pieces and parts. And conspiracy theories are a whole thing I'd love to cover. Other people have covered them way better. The general gist of a conspiracy theory is people want an explanation for things. People want to know why things happen. And sometimes when those explanations are just a little too simple, well, there's no way it could be that simple. It has to be something more complex. And so they buy into these conspiracy theories, and then they wind up in a situation where they're following QAnon, they're following Donald Trump and listening to what he says. You look at everything if you just look from January 6, 2021 on, and all of the stuff that Donald Trump has said and done. And you look at something like when he says, well, I didn't know what was going to happen on January 6, 2021. Either you're a complete moron and you didn't realize that what you said in the months leading up to January 6th and then the rally that you held on January 6th and everything that you had planned ahead of that was going to lead to people marching down there and storming the Capitol. Or you did know and you did it intentionally. And either way, you're not fit to be president. Either way, you don't belong in the Oval Office. And that's the kind of stuff that makes me mad. That's the kind of stuff that gets me riled up because it's frustrating. It's so frustrating to sit here knowing what I have sacrificed, knowing what others have sacrificed for people to have the right to vote, for people to have the right to live freely. And seeing that all potentially being ripped away. It's not the Democrats that are trying to rip away freedoms. Kamala Harris isn't coming for your guns. I had a comment a while back on a video where somebody was arguing with me, and their big talking point was that Kamala Harris was coming for their guns, and then they went on saying that she was a communist, a Marxist, a fascist, and they don't even understand what those words mean. If you have if you have the gall to try and say that Kamala Harris is a Marxist or a communist or a fascist, go do some research and learn what those words actually mean, because she's pretty far from all of that. But if you're looking for fascism, on the other hand, if you look up the definition of fascism, Donald Trump kind of fits right in that little mold right there. Strong man, trying to take complete power, trying to be able to run everything, be the one in charge. He kind of fits that mold. And no other president in our history has even come close to that. I'm not saying this as a red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican thing. I'm not even saying this as an independent versus parties thing. I'm saying this as a freedom thing. Donald Trump is a direct threat to democracy. And he can sit there and cry about, oh, somebody took a shot at me. Get the hell over it. Maybe if you didn't stand up there and threaten people's lives with your rhetoric, maybe if you didn't stand up there as a threat to our way of life, if you could admit that you were wrong about things, I don't know, like people eating animals in Springfield, Ohio, eating pets, which is a completely bullshit thing, completely made up, 100%. J.D. Vance's team reached out to Springfield, to the city mayor, or to the city, whatever the hell they're called, the people in charge of the city, prior to any of this coming out. And they said, hey, is any of this true? And they said, no, we have no reports of any of this. There is no basis for any of this stuff. It is a conspiracy theory that there's nothing to it. And yet J.D. Vance started spreading it. And then Donald Trump picked it up and started running with it. And when they were called out for their bullshit, instead of saying, you know what, yeah, you're right, we were wrong, they doubled down. And they've been trying like hell to make it as bad as possible. The people of Springfield, Ohio have been negatively impacted over the past few weeks because of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. The schools, City Hall, post office, they have gotten threats that they have to take seriously because of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. There is a term that you may or may not be familiar with called stochastic terrorism. And what that is when you have somebody in power, when you have somebody that has a platform, a large platform, and they start eating away and eroding people's confidence in things, when they start spreading lies, outright falsehoods about things, knowing what the results will be, knowing that people are going to go out there and they're going to try to take matters into their own hands. It's very similar to the way the mafia used to work, where you could never get the Don on anything because he never actually told he never actually told the hitman to go take out the guy running, the police chief or whatever. He never told the guy to do that. All he said was, it'd be nice if this guy wasn't around anymore. And the hitman took it into his own hands to go and take care of that. That's what stochastic terrorism is, except that it has a political aspect. And as when a politician with power stands up there and makes things sound bad, says things like, oh, they're eating the dogs and the cats. Knowing what's going to happen. When they stand up and they say things like, the election was stolen from me, maybe you should go persuade the vice president to do the right thing. That's what stochastic terrorism is. And it's something that we need to address. It's something we need to talk about. And it's something that you need to get angry, but political violence is never the answer. Violence is never the answer. What you should do is go to the ballot box on November 5th. First of all, make sure you're registered to vote. I'll go ahead and put a link to vote.org down in the or vote.gov down in the comments. You can go make sure that you're registered to vote, and if you're not registered, get registered. And then you need to go to the polls on November 5th, or if early voting is available in your state, you can use early voting. If you're using mail-in voting, make sure you follow the rules, because in places like Pennsylvania, they've said that they're not going to count votes that are mailed in without the date on them. So make sure you are following the rules on the envelope to the letter. Vote. Vote, vote, vote. Vote Democrat down the ticket. And I wouldn't normally say vote one party over the other, but this year it's super important. Because we need to send a message. We need to send a message to these people that their kind of politics, that their kind of political violence will not be tolerated moving forward. We need to tell people like Donald Trump, you're not welcome here. We need to tell J.D. Vance, you're not welcome here. Across the board, we need to tell these people that. Vote blue down the ballot. If you're in Texas, Florida, hell, Ohio, I'm in Ohio. And even though I know Harris has a very low chance of winning Ohio, I'm still voting Harris. But I'm also voting for Sherrod Brown. I'm voting Democrat down the ticket. Because this Republican Party does not have my best interest or my family's best interest in mind. They don't have the best interest of my children, my daughter's futures in mind. And all they're doing is running around making stuff up. So we need to tell them this will not be tolerated. We will not allow this. We need to vote Democrat, vote blue, down the ticket, 2024, November 5th. Do it. And save the future of our country. because as Kamala Harris so happily says, we're not going back.